Ouch, that was a harsh transition. Hey guys, I am I am James Waddell. Thank you very much for joining across the various platforms. And if you're watching this recorded session, thank you as well. We like to be very interactive, so if you're on YouTube, over on the right hand side, there's a way to ask us and interact with us in chat. And we will be keeping an eye on that, and we will be bringing certain comments and questions in as we move through time. It is my pleasure to introduce Mike Pacini as my co-host. Mike,
Hey,
how you
James.
doing, buddy?
How's it going?
Man. I gotta tell you, it's a strange day. It's really weird. Hopefully, we can get through this.
Yeah, I hear you.
It's, uh,
I'm glad we chose the right uniform again for this. I mean, we're all in our blue
it's
shirts.
stunning. You know, the guys over at the Mosh Pit, they have this thing work at We every Friday. And it seems like I'm always wearing the wrong collar because I usually only wear blue. But sometimes they show up wearing all black or all white. There's no communications as to what, but it's a very high percentage, which is quite stunning.
Right.
Anyway, I digress. So hey, let's hop right in.
Yeah.
I wanted to start by giving everybody a sense of who we are and why we do it. And it's different than our web shows, right? I think today what we want to do is to get a little bit deeper into a very specific service offering that we have around distributed work. And we want to be able to convey and communicate some of the methodology that we deploy in that, and certainly some of the insights and impacts those insights have in terms of optimizing your hybrid workplace as it relates to teams and individuals. What we started with as a company when we formed was the notion of being able to surface insights from enterprise systems. So data locked away in your email systems, in your collaboration systems such as Teams or Google Meet. And what the pandemic allowed us to do is to really get really truly deep into research, both sponsoring that research and participating in that research to help inform what's missing in terms of the marketplace. And really what we got out of all of that was being able to surface insights that help inform humanistic measures. So how do we define humanistic measures, right? So we surface data and create insights really in four dimensions: change management, diversity, inclusion, employee engagement, and employee well-being. We focus on being able to show workplace and how it's impacting the initiatives within those four dimensions. And I think that is really what's unique and innovative in our approach into the marketplace. And it's certainly different than what has been done in the past. Speaking very generally, what was done in the past is to measure the employee perception of space, to report out on those perceptions. And then if there were deficiencies, to remediate those deficiencies by modifying the space in some form or fashion so that you had a higher perception of it. That is absolutely still needed. There are many good companies, you may hear us mention a few names today, who have been very successful and have a tremendous amount of data that's very impactful as it relates to perceptions of workplace. Our approach was different. We looked at what was happening in terms of hybrid work, in terms of remote work, return to office. How do we measure the impact this has on individual? So Mike and I had several conversations along with a bunch of really smart people, and we realized, hey, let's take a step back. Who are we talking about? Who are the people that are impacted in this post-pandemic world as it relates to workplace and workplace strategy? And it was knowledge workers. So we made an assumption. Knowledge workers work in projects. Those projects require teams, and those teams require recurring meetings in order to communicate, collaborate, and innovate for the success of the project. So we said, hey, what if we, for the moment, took out location and we said, let's measure what's happening at that recurring meeting. What are the insights we can glean as it relates to the four buckets that we just mentioned? And as it turned out,
Can I go ahead and just ask you a question about the previous slide?
yeah, let me go back.
So, is this culture? We hear a lot of CEOs and leaders in the businesses talking about, gee whiz, I want everyone back to the office because that's how I know our culture survives. But aren't these the elements of a culture in a company?
There's so many landmines in the world today. I'm just going to give you my opinion, right? So everything's prefaced with my opinion. This is my answer, right? I think what we've done is in the past we've defined culture as branding and color and perception of mission and values in the workplace. Perfectly fine, right? I think what's happened to me is I've changed my mind on what culture is in a post-pandemic world, right? Culture is how our people are perceiving their mission and how they perceive the best way to achieve the work that they need to achieve, right? That's the culture that I have, right? It's almost like a militaristic definition of culture, right? So improvise and overcome, right? Tell me how you do that, and then we'll make that a best practice. So from that perspective, yeah, I think that is culture at a team level, right? If I know that my team is engaged, if I know that they're being treated well and feel like they're being treated well and they're not being overworked and I've got good employee well-being. Diversity and inclusion, somewhat self-explanatory. We do have the way to measure that diversity and inclusion in our data sets if that is something that the executive team and each individual wishes to opt into. And change management is, again, somewhat self-explanatory. But right now, change management is huge, right? There's so much change in the market, in the companies and in individual companies that's been forced upon us. How do we measure that in terms of impact to teams and projects? And we fit into several change management frameworks in terms of being able to score change management. So we fit into that from a informational perspective, from a change management perspective. That's a great question, though, Mike. So culture at a team level, how do we measure it? So we said, hey, there's got to be a better way. So we defined that in these recurring team meetings that are typically project based, what if we sent a pulse survey? And these meetings typically recur weekly. So in thinking in terms of agile software development, or maybe it's some sort of product development, maybe it's engineering Kaizen meeting, something along those lines. Typically there's recurring meetings. If we sent a pulse survey that was very easy to fill out, can and would the individuals be willing to accept that and to have a high participation rate in that pulse survey? And so we started studying that. Coincidentally, by the way, we keep mentioning project meetings. It's something that's core to what we do. You don't have to be in a project meeting. You could be in a finance meeting, or you could be in a team wellness meeting, or just a team meeting that you have weekly. We have subsets of questions that we change in our pulse survey. It's a small subset of questions to make it very relevant and meaningful for the individuals in those teams. But we want to stay focused on project meetings because we believe that a majority of the knowledge workers are working on some form of project. So we decided in that pulse survey a bunch of things. We learned this in a very, very school of hard knocks kind of way, that the pulse survey has to be less than 1 minute when you take it. And we were successful with that and still being able to get the insights that we needed to get. That's number one. Number two, you have to be able to get very meaningful impact from an individual perspective very quickly from the survey results that you filled out. And rather than trying to just explain it to you, I'm just going to show it to you, hopefully. Let me see if I can get my email working here. So there we go. Can you see my screen, Mike? Yeah, you should.
Yes.
Yes. Yeah. So when we send the pulse survey out, you have the ability to provide feedback to all the other participants on the meeting. We call that a meeting promoter score. It's a score that allows you to rate the communication and the collaboration and the contribution of an individual. And it's really easy to do. And you do that for all the participants in the meeting. And
a participant is getting it because the meeting owner has put the tool in the email or the actual invite for the meeting, correct?
Yep, absolutely. Yep.
So it
We'll
is
get back to
automated.
that. Yeah, we'll get back to that. Oh,
Okay.
yeah. That's a good point. Yeah. The tool is automated. Going back a little bit here. So you have the ability in a meeting in order to score your other participants who are also in that meeting in terms of their collaboration and communication. And from that, we get these meeting promoter scores, right? So in this example, what we can see from this meeting, the lowest meeting participant score was 30, which isn't very good at all, and the high score of 88, which is good. So I can see that others have rated me an 88 in my communication and collaboration if this was mine. So that's in that particular meeting. Overall, what I can see for all the meetings that the company has been in, so all the business units, all the meetings, I can see that we've gotten a score of 61%. On the right-hand side, what I see is somewhat of a benchmark. It's not really a benchmark, but you might say it's a benchmark. It's for all those who have ever used cognitive.workspace. That's our tool that we have from a pulse survey perspective. And you can see the individual score as it relates to that. So it's a little bit of a gamification, right, as it relates to why you would want to take this pulse survey. And that was one of the key factors that we had to have an answer for is why would someone want to take this pulse survey, even though it takes less than a minute? What's the value that they get out of it? Number one, you get immediate feedback on how you're doing in the team and how your behavior might be affecting the overall team. That was number one. Now, number two, how do we do it? And Mike, I think this is where you were headed, right?
Well, and
It
one
is
other thing to add there, James, is if you think about how someone who owns a meeting wants to get feedback from the team, usually it's there in the meeting. So how did you guys think we did, right? And there's that tendency, meetings run, up to its time, so people really don't want to say anything. Here, you've got 24 hours to go ahead and fill this thing out, and it takes a minute or less, right?
Yeah, yeah. It's a really good. It's a good point, Mike. Thank you for that. So, so how does it trigger? I mean, is it difficult to set up? Does it take a long time? How does it work? Right? Is it some of the questions that we get. If you have any meeting, it can be Zoom, it can be Google Meet, it can be Slack, you can use Outlook, anything that you use to track a meeting and to host a meeting. It's irrelevant to us. And we made it very agnostic, very purposefully for that reason. All you have to do is add cognitive.workspace at meetingquality.com to your recurring meeting, and then we take it from there. We do all the work behind the scenes, and when that meeting starts, we will send a response email to everyone who has been invited to that meeting. And that's how we gather the insights as it relates to the project success probability and to the meeting 360 views that we mentioned earlier. Now, there's a little bit more to that in terms of what happens at a corporate level behind the scenes. Because we're adding cognitive.workspace at meetingquality.com and we're sending an email out, we want to work with IT to make sure that our email address is whitelisted so that you can get it, right? We also want to make sure that JavaScript is turned on. It is in 99% of the organizations by default, but some of our insights require Java in order to produce those. So that's usually fairly simple. That's really the biggest barrier that we have to implementing our solution. And then you get the responses from an automated perspective immediately when you hit submit. That's your scores. And then 24 hours later, as you mentioned earlier, Mike, you get the aggregate of the team scores. And that has been one of the largest success factors for us, is being able to get that individual's view within 24 hours within 24 hours as to what's happening from a team perspective and what they might look like as it relates to their team scores. And again, just to give you some insights into what that looks like. Let me pull up this again, just as an example. Let me go down here. So some of the things I can do when I get that 24-hour response is I know my productivity level. It's my dot right here, based on my score. My productivity level as it relates to sustainability and whether or not it's low or high. That's based on the scores that I put in. So I can see now my scores are somewhat neutral. It's a little less than neutral. It's a little low from a productivity perspective. And my sustainability is a little low at 40%. But what I can see over here is others on my team have a much higher productivity level for whatever reason. I now know that there's a conversation that I can have in my next team meeting as to what I might be able to be doing differently. Maybe there's load sharing, maybe there's some things that I can take on to help my team members out. It could be that maybe this team is a subset of this overall working team. Maybe they have a second phase of a project, so they're in this meeting to be informed and to provide input for this team who's doing the heavy work. We don't make any of those assumptions. We simply surface the insight that, hey, there are people who are working much harder than others, particularly you. Is there something that you can do from a self-assessment perspective to help those teams out? And we can get a bit deeper into that as well. So if we go here, what can we see? We can see, based on network maps, the relationships and perceptions and emotions of the individuals in the meetings. And we'll talk about those emotions in a second. It does become very apparent, though, when a project is being successful and when a project is at risk, because we're measuring emotions of a meeting in a free text field. So we only accept data and we only surface insights data that the individual is willing to give us. So by typing in a free text field is how we get those emotional measurements. Usually, what you start seeing is everyone is very is within the zone of analytical enjoy, and that means the projects are running smoothly. You start seeing individuals and project teams moving a little more towards fear and then into anger. When they're into anger, they now have a realization that there's something that they're unable to overcome as it relates to the team and the project success, and the language that they're using is now being classified as anger, and that project is certainly now not going to be brought in the way that it was intended to be brought in, right? It by definition would be a failed project. So we can get that from those emotions. We can also get that over time in this graph, and that's what this looks like. This is the overall team perception of project success over time. And what we see here is an aggregate of the meeting promoter score. We call that a meeting quality score. And we see that the team's meeting quality score is going down over time. So this particular example, this project that we're measuring, is going to be successful. There's no doubt based on the project success probability metric. But the team is very much in conflict. And they're doing so, they're probably in conflict because they're working so hard and driving each other to bring this project in success. Good stuff, very humanistic, helps us define how the teams are doing as it relates to project success in the context that they're in now. And this is data that we share again immediately and data that we share with the team within 24 hours. But and that's all automated. But we haven't talked about location yet. And that's one of the things I wanted to bring into this assessment, this overview, if you will. And it's something that we call our workplace impact report. It's usually something that's very private and confidential in terms of the format and the insights that we surface as it relates to the customers. Those clients that we work with, this report is tailored very specifically around their current initiative sets. So we help bring in location data as it relates to the factors that we mentioned earlier, which is change management, diversity and inclusion, well-being, and engagement. So that said, though, we ran for about a month a trial of individuals who were volunteers to help us generate data for the report out that I'm about to show you. So there's absolutely no customer data in this report. We've used some of the more generic insights that we would show in our monthly report outs here to give you a sense for how we would show location impact on teams and team success. And we did that because we want to make sure that we're very clear on our GDPR compliance and our California privacy compliance. So we only use data in a manner that's consistent with the permissions that we have to use it. So the team that gave us this data set was very aware that we're using it from a marketing perspective. So top of mind is attrition risk for everybody at the moment during the Great Resignation. Can our insights related to project success help define attrition, potential attrition, and potential burnout? And the answer is yes. First, we have to talk about how we set things up. we set things up in terms of teams. In this case, a team was defined as a business unit that reports directly to the CEO. And then what you see here is a network map of all the individuals that make up that particular business unit or team. Now, the meeting promoter score in a network map, it's a little bit different than what you might be thinking in terms of ONA, organizational network analysis. Our network map takes into account things such as your perceived effective collaboration and communication and project contribution, which then allows us to identify potential toxic personalities or those that might be entering burnout. Again, different than traditional organizational network analysis, but very important. What we're seeing here is trends from the last month to this month. So is my team dynamic as it relates to related to meeting promoter, is it increasing, decreasing, or staying the same? So in this case, there are initiatives in place in order to improve the team dynamics and to improve individual contribution within those meetings. This case, the initiative isn't sticking, and there's some initiatives that need to be put into place to help better inform the intent around change management in order to help the teams communicate and collaborate better. So how do we get a little deeper into that? There's these things called working practice sustainability, which helps us graph productivity towards our perceived sustainability. We mentioned this earlier on the monthly or on the automated report out, but what we can see here are outliers. These outliers are individuals that have a relatively low productivity, very high sustainability. These individuals are those that are working very hard, have a very low sustainability. So these outliers are something that we need to be brought more into the area of normality. And I don't really like to use that word, but statistically it fits the normality that we see here in this gray box. So over time, what we should be seeing are these dots drifting more towards the center. Now, speaking of over time, on the right-hand side, what we have is a view of this, these long-term trends over time. We can see it's measured in work-life balance, stress, productivity, and connectedness. What we see here is the dots. Each dot is an individual in the business unit. Anything above 0 means that my dots, my individuals, are trending more towards a positive outcome, which is what we want to see. Anything below 0 means I have individuals who are trending towards a very negative outcome. They feel isolated, they feel unproductive, they're very stressed, and they're very much overworked. And I would venture to say these dots correlate to these dots from a data set perspective, and these are the dots that are at risk of attrition. That makes sense, Mike? Did I say that?
Yes.
Right?
I guess the question that comes to mind though is, okay, so this is research and development. They probably have 15 projects that are going. Can these dots represent a project team so you can kind of see, the aggregate of all the?
Man, what a great question. Normally what you see in our reports, unless it's otherwise noted, is a dot is an individual. We do have the ability to roll that up, and a dot could then be a subclassification of a business unit, or maybe it's a group of individuals within a business unit, and then subsequently we can roll it up by group so that we can see what these trends are. So in this case, what we're seeing here is these are the individuals that were measured in terms of research and development. Now, another good question that you just brought up, another good insight that you just brought up. Do we measure every recurring meeting? Well, the answer is no. As part of the onboarding process, we first define the structure, and then we define the initiatives, and then we define the best meetings by the meeting owners as to the ones that are indicative of the work style for the team. So we only want to measure maybe 2, maybe 3 tops meetings for an individual. And that really depends on the recurrence schedule of those meetings. So we don't want to overwhelm someone with every single meeting that they're in giving us a response. It should only be maybe 1 or 2 meetings a week that you would be responding to get the data that we need.
Good.
Yep. So now finally we're here. Hybrid workplace assessment. How do we take this and put it into location? So thank you for sticking with us that whole time. Now let's talk about location. Well, first we have to get the humanistic aspect of the things, right? We have to understand the methodology, understand how we measure human-centricness of the data. And now let's apply that to location. The first thing that we have the ability to do, and it's on top of absolutely everybody's mind, is how do we know the difference in impact between those that are full remote and those that are in office. And man, is that a ball of wax. I mean, people people are getting really, really angry in both courts with a belief system based on perceptions and not measurable data. We don't take a side. Honestly, we don't. We don't have a horse in either game at the moment. We're just surfacing the data that the teams are reporting. So how do we surface that data? On the left-hand side, as an example, we have physical office. On the right-hand side, we have those individuals who are remote. What we've done is we've taken the project success score that each individual provides us, and we've rolled it all up in this business organization and sliced the data by physical office. So here we can see that the project success probability is somewhere between 72, 77, and it's trending upwards. We also see that meeting quality score. That is a correlation of how well the teams are rating their communication, collaboration as well as well-being to get this score. So that's somewhere between 49 and 59, also trending upwards in the physical office. On the right-hand side, we see remote. Remote project success is between 64 and 61, meeting quality score between 49 and 55. So the project success probability is trending downward a little bit. The meeting quality score is staying about the same between 49 and 55. So how do we make that comparable, right? We have this this heuristic. There's some fancy math basically that goes into a scoring system. Our scoring system is between 0 and 100, and we get a cognitive score, is what we call it. So based on the data sets that we have around physical office, we have a cognitive score of 75 for this business unit. And again, based on the data set that we have for those working remote, we have a cognitive score of 66. So in this example, right, in this data set, I don't want to create, this great, world war here. All we're saying is in the data set, these individuals found that they had a much higher probability of success working in the physical office as opposed to working fully remote. That's what we're saying. That's what the data is telling us to say.
And it goes back to what we've been saying, James. We don't, either way, this is a value, whether or not everyone's working from a physical office or everyone is remote or somewhere in between, with something like hybrid. The value is still there. So
100%, yeah. And because we're measuring this over time, sentiment could change, right? There could be, maybe the kids go back to school, so then suddenly remote scores go up, right? And that's important. We have to know that. And that's one of the beauties of our tool, in that it is a recurring data point that lets you do trend lines over time to inform very important, very expensive decisions as it relates to your workplace. It's not point in time surveys. So moving us a little deeper. So that was the overall business unit. We do have the ability to get deeper into each grouping of teams. So in this case, it's another team, business units being reported up to the CEO. So when we slice that data, slightly different scores come out. So the remote's 49, the office is 66. What we see here are these dimensions as it relates to satisfaction with location. You can see these on the right-hand side. I'm not going to read all of this, but just to give you some sense, it's how satisfied are you with the meeting that you've been in? How satisfied are you with air quality, noise level, lighting at this location? That's item D. So you can see here, these are aggregate responses for these teams across these dimensions, right? For this month. So it's a really good point here, right? So there's companies like Rework, there's companies like Leesman that offer you very detailed insights as to perceptions of workplace. Is cognitive competing with those? The answer is absolutely not. I was just on a presentation that Leesman was doing, and I was absolutely blown away by the data sets that they were able to generate and that they have in terms of benchmarking workplace and perceptions of remote workplace. What we do is something different. We provide a view of what's happening at a project and a team level as it relates to projects. So we know, by way of example, that how satisfied or dissatisfied the teams are with some well-being things like air quality, noise level, lighting at a particular location. What a Leesman would let you be able to do is dive much deeper into that data set. So we would trigger something to say, hey, you've got a very low score in terms of environmentals for a particular location. you should be doing something about that. We would recommend maybe a deeper level assessment, such as a leaseman or a rework, for you to go in and find out specifically what's happening as it relates to noise, lighting, and air quality at that location. And then we would help surface the remediations. We would help measure those remediations in terms of its impact on projects. So by way of example, if we go deeper into this, this is a location, 1214 Center. We have a cognitive rating of 50, and it's based on these scores. Actually, this one's pretty high from an air quality and noise perspective, which is interesting, but very low in terms of productivity. And that could be for a number of reasons, right? It could be that they don't know how to use the technology, which is some of the things we're seeing here. So C is, how satisfied are you with understanding policies and programs and training for the space in your office? It could be maybe this is a space as a service. It could be that they showed up that day, or they're working from this space over time, and they haven't really have received any formal training on how to use the technology in the space, and it's hindering their productivity. Again, that would be an insight that we would surface, that you would be able to go in then and start doing a deeper dive on from a management perspective, from a facility design perspective, to determine what's happening. And to get experimental. And if we do get experimental, and I strongly suggest that absolutely everybody does, what you want to be able to do is to measure that in terms of your pilots. On the right-hand side, what we see is a traditional floor plate for a particular customer. On the right-hand side, that's the left-hand side. On the right-hand side, what we see is an experimental space that's intended to increase productivity, communication, and collaboration for teams that are meeting in that space. And what we then see is a comparison between these two. So those working out of pilot A gets a score of 54. Those working out of pilot B gets a score of 62. So we can then see that the occupants have a much better perception, a much better scoring system as it relates to the workplace that's been put in into the pilot. And we measure that not just in these trend lines here that you see as it relates to stress and your self-assessment of productivity, but also in the project success probability scores, the meeting quality scores. All of that is produced on a project level within a location, so that you can see which one of your experimental pilots is actually producing the best results, and it helps you replicate that over time.
So
And again, I think
the folks at 1214, they basically said, let's run a couple of pilots, let's make some changes, let's not spend a ton, but let's get something done so we can see if we can move the needle on these outcomes, right?
yeah, that's exactly what's happened there, right? The innovation here, and not for it to get lost, right? I'm going to say this a bunch of times probably, but we're not only measuring someone's willingness to state what their perceptions are for their work environment. That is important, and it helps inform initiatives. What we're measuring is the impact on project success, the impact on an individual's ability to be perceived as a strong communicator, collaborator, and contributor to the success of their overall team, which is typically defined as a project. It doesn't have to be a project. It can be some other type of recurring meeting that we can measure. Yeah, and that's it from a innovation and what we bring to market perspective. I've am in strong belief that this is somewhat unique at the moment, because the approach we take is at a individual and a team perspective, as opposed to a facility or a location perspective first. We get to the location space, but as you can see, the first most important things for us to surface are the insights as it relates to the individual humanistic insights. And then we get into location. And then what we are able to see is changes that you're providing in the physical workspace should surface as positive indicators, positive measurements and metrics in the human-centric initiatives that we provide insights to. So there we are, Mike. What do you think?
I think it's very compelling. But then again, you know, I don't necessarily have a dog in the game on this one, because like I said, a physical office for so long has been just assumed to be, hey, take our word for it. This is going to work out real nice. What we're doing here, the technology, the layout, whatever those factors are. Now you can, before you spend a ton, you already know whether or not you're going to get the kind of outcome that you're investing in.
Yeah. Yeah, you're absolutely right. Some of the things that we didn't get really deep into are use cases, and use cases are so unique to individuals. But one of the things as a viewer you might be asking is, how do we know which teams should be in the office, or maybe which team should be in the office first, or which team should be fully remote? The answer that we would provide, the insights that we can show, are it's really those teams that are who are struggling with project success, that are struggling with team dynamics, the ones that have higher outliers. What we're able to show is the physical office, meeting in person, and the physical office is a tool to help them meet in person, improves those scores because it increases the ability to communicate, collaborate, and innovate. That's something that is very difficult to define if you're not using the same methodology that we're using, or a similar methodology that we're using, by getting deep into those project team meetings. And it's something that's constantly being asked in terms of an industry, and all the information that's out there on LinkedIn that I've seen. And granted, I'm biased because I'm looking for this information, right? So maybe I'm just seeing a lot of it because I'm looking for it. But we have the answer for that. We have the ability to show if your teams need remediation, if they're at risk, then you should be able to have a workplace strategy in place to help bring those teams back into productivity, back into the fold, to increase your culture in terms of being able to deliver projects successfully and reducing project risk. Then I get challenged on that sometimes. Well, how do you know? Well, I can make a safe assumption, right? There's this trend called biophilic design. Maybe we're all familiar with it. Maybe some of us aren't, but it was a trend before the pandemic hit of being able to bring outdoor elements, nature elements into the workplace. And I was a part of a number of research projects related to that. And there's absolutely no doubt bringing nature elements indoors into a work environment had a very significant and positive impact on employee well-being and employee success and employee productivity. I can make a fairly short logical jump to say that your work environment has an impact on you, your well-being, and your productivity. So it stands to reason that if you have a bad remote environment, for whatever reason, it's not supporting your productivity, then having an office environment that does is going to increase your productivity, right? It's going to increase your sustainability and your well-being. It's not something that can be generically placed into this or that. And I think that's what the industry is struggling with. It's been so used, or maybe it's the pandemic that done this. We're all so used to taking one side, right? This or that. What we're able to then define is, hey, there's this notion that it really is a hybrid. Some teams will work best fully remote, and that's cool. Support them. Find out what's working there and continue to do that. There are other teams that can certainly benefit from being in the office, and really the only question that I think the industry has is, how do you really and truly measure that? Beyond where do you want to work? How do you feel about your productivity at home versus your productivity in the office? We now bring some visibility into the actual impact it has on a project level. And I think that's the uniqueness of what we have.
Right, and to come back around to what you started with, I mean, and that means you don't need all the email data and all of the, locked away, that would take very long time for us to get, that data to output some type of outcomes. You can just do this very, very quickly.
Well, yeah, thank you. That's another one. It's conceivable, and there's some other really good companies out there that do have the ability to provide similar insights. But yeah, you really got to get deep into the organizational metadata, right? You got to potentially change your policies and procedures. You got to worry about security and security protocols of the data. They have to get real deep into your email system, your meeting system, and from that they glean really good insights, similar to the insights that we provide. We looked at that as a potential mechanism, but the barriers that we just mentioned takes a long time to set up, so much conversation and really risk in allowing a third party into the most critical data sets that you have as an organization.
Sure.
That just wasn't for us. There had to be a better way. So that's how we got to this better way. With that, my friend, let me check comments to see if there's any. I don't believe there are. I think we're good there. Yep. I think we're good then. I think this is a good live show. Thank you all for watching, and those who attended live, thank you very, very much.
Thank you.
For those watching the recording, thank you as well. Reach out to Mike or myself if you have any questions whatsoever. Visit cognitivewx.info for more information on our solutions. Yep. Thanks, everybody. We'll talk.